Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Temple Mount podcast. My name is Zoo, the Ancient Dragon, and tonight I will be presenting quite an interesting topic on the 72 founding dragons of El, their bloodlines, and the role they played in the cosmic creation of humanity, as well as the many bloodlines, lineages, tribes, groups, nations, and empires that they've been a part of. Essentially, this is going to be a starter topic, and it's going to build off of many other topics from previous podcasts hosted by the Temple Mount. Um, I'm really excited for this one. This is going to be a third part in the Ancient Mystery series that me and Shogun have been doing. Tonight, I'll be mostly doing the presenting, and then I will be answering questions along the way. So to begin, um, there's this thing called the Shem HaMephorash in Judaic mysticism, and it's known as the 72-fold name of God. Well, in this case, they're not talking about God as in the God of the Bible or just a generic name for God. They're, in my belief, talking about El Elyon, who in ancient Canaanite times, depending on which culture you followed, was the head deity of a pantheistic culture, if you will, who some sources say had 72 sons, some say had 70 sons, and others say had 77 sons by a group of consorts, and in particular one consort by the name of Ashra. And the reason why this is really important is that it's being acknowledged by the Jewish mystics who see things behind the veil. They are the ones who are the hidden lore keepers of the real Jewish story. And they're also the inheritors of a bloodline lineage of one of the 72 founding dragons. I mean, you've probably heard the name Yahweh. The actual name is Ea, number 34 of 72. That's their particular number in the order. They're one of the founding dragons who didn't actually corrupt the Israelites per se, but swayed the Judahites or Judeans and the Levite brotherhoods or tribes into forming an alliance, particularly after Solomon's death and the destruction of the first temple. This is why the narrative between the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and much later on in the Old Testament begins to differ much more in who they're talking about, what they're talking about, and who's their prime creator, or who do they believe is their patron deity. And that's because it becomes clear, depending on which narrative you're following. Are you following the Elohist narrative? Are you following the Yahwistic narrative? Well, either way, it ends up becoming a Yahwistic narrative because eventually the Jews decide to become monotheists who solely worship the dragon known as Yahweh, who is the one called Adonai and El Shaddai and all these other names in the Old Testament, and is known as the God of the Old Testament by the Christians. But that's only one of the 72. And so to kind of introduce this topic, I'd like to rewind things a little bit back to a story you guys might be familiar with, known as the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is actually mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, shortly after the flood. And essentially what happened is that a bunch of people who survived the flood gathered together, and became one supernation, more or less. They had a similar enough culture and language that they eventually had a centralized language as well. And they decided that now that these 72 tribes or groups of people, they would get together and they would build this monument, a tower to the heavens. And in doing so, they angered, quote unquote, God, who decided that it would be in humanity's best interest to split them up into 72 groups, if you will, districts, precincts, whatever, and scatter the people around the world, and not just scatter the people, but scatter their culture, history, language, religious beliefs, etc., and that these 72 would each be shepherded by one of the 72 dragons who were the sons of El. This was um, El's kind of final blessing to all of his sons because El didn't follow the primogeniture system that we were very familiar with in medieval European history, but rather split it up of equal share or equalish portion to all of the sons. And there was one in particular who was quite jealous. If I guess that's one way you can say it. He says so himself through his prophets in the Old Testament. Yahweh was jealous of the newfound recognition that his brothers were receiving as people started worshiping, believing, following these other dragons, these 71 other dragons, if you will, and came up with a sneaky and clever plan to try taking over the people, the world. You might call this the beast system, even. But essentially a system of systems meant to ensnare humanity under one rule. And in El's place, it would be Yahweh who is worshipped as the one true God above all. And in doing so, he needed a people. He needed many groups of people. And in doing so, Yahweh presented himself much later on to Abraham, who was the patriarch of three of the biggest major religions in the world. And so when Abraham met Yahweh, or as some might believe is Yahweh, Yahweh convinced Abraham to forget about all the other dragons. And it's said in the Bible that Abraham forgot the ancestors, or forgot the gods of his ancestors, and began worshiping one God in particular, the God of Abraham. And in doing so, this God became the central figure of three of the biggest religions in the world: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And religion itself is but a tool. It's a form of lesser magic, an exoteric magic. And by getting all these people to believe and worship and create their own stories and interpretations and spread the word, this increases Yahweh's influence, spiritual ranking even, which would then be used to, on the flip side, for the beast system, I believe. And essentially, how the system works is by using some of these people for one purpose, Yahweh could use the other people for another purpose. This is where the left-hand path versus right-hand path kind of thinking comes from, using dualism against humanity, and essentially ensnaring humanity's perception so that Yahweh would come out supreme above all else, the name above all names. And this is quite dangerous because it leads us to where we are now with, a society that's becoming more degenerate, that's taking people's rights away, taking women's rights away, taking men's rights away. All of this serves this system. It serves this dragon. And now that I've briefly opened up the backstory, the plot, the history, if you will, I'd like to open the floor for any questions before continuing.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
So in the Bible, it says that mankind is made in the image of God, and yet these 72 beings are called Drakan in Greek, which translates into dragon. So would you say it's true that humans are actually in the form of God, but God uses these dragons as watchers over us? Did God create these beings, or are they just subordinate to him? What do you make of the fact that El himself is sort of a human, and yet he created these sort of dragon-type gods?
I definitely think that's a really important question that requires us to examine the etymology and mythology of multiple cultures. So the term seraphim means like fiery breathing serpent, and oftentimes people link it to not just dragons but like angels. And essentially, what I believe is they are one and the same. They're essentially able to shift between forms, a human form, an angelic form, and a dragon form, and that we are created in the image of God, just one of the images. I believe El has many forms, and a dragon and a seraphim and some sort of godlike entity being among them, but that El also has a human-like image that we are created in.
I understand. In the Bible, it says that 33% of these angels followed the great red dragon, Satan, into rebellion. Do you agree that 33% of the 72 Dracon followed the great red dragon and 66% remain loyal?
I agree to an extent. I think 24 out of 72, aka 33%, do follow the red dragon. But if I remember correctly, 24 of them are essentially neutral, and then 24 of them actually are believers of El or retain belief in their All Father.
Do you believe that each major culture and nation on the earth was assigned a specific dragon to be its like watcher and protector or guard or guardian or judge?
Yes, and what might really surprise you is how a dragon might change over time with what people and religious belief systems it encourages. Um, there's no one size fits all when it comes to this, but essentially, yes, I do believe that these 72 dragons are the ones who um, brought forth civilization, culture, religion, technology to all these tribal level people that allowed them to have the tools that they needed to build actual civilizations from city states to empires, even to this very day.
So, do you believe that all 72 dragons are still alive and active in the world today?
No, I do not. I do not believe most of them are super active. Um, you know, especially the ones who are kind of on the neutral side. They if they don't have a particular people, tribe, civilization that is under their wings, so to speak, they have no need to be in these realms. They can exist in the realms above. And even the ones who follow the great red dragon can dwell in infernal like places in the realms above that are havens for them. And uh, out of the other 24, they have the opportunity to stick within L's home, if you will, in the realms above and don't need to come down here. And so I believe that only a minority of them have sticked with humanity throughout time and have stayed.
Well, I think this is a hugely important part of the puzzle because in the West we think of angels as humans with wings, and they can appear that way, or as humans without wings. But I think seraphim, meaning flying fiery serpent, we need to realize that what we think of as angels, the highest order of beings, are dragons, and this is a big secret in exoteric religion that you're doing something to bring awareness to, and I think that's really important. So thank you for doing that.
I appreciate that. One thing I do want to clarify, though, is in the current standing, I believe that there are seven that remained loyal to L, and seven who are, including the Great Red Dragon himself, who are on the Great Red Dragon side. And those are the most active dragons or players on this planet. So in total, I think 14 are super active. About the others, I can't really say.
Well, I would love for this to be a series, an ongoing series that you do, or that I participate in, or others participate in. I think this is very important. Um, Short form content is good. People have shorter attention spans these days. so we can make it short and sweet. But were there any other areas you wanted to get into in this episode?
Yeah, kind of quickly wanted to go over a story, if you will, that pertains to the 72 dragons. And that would be about one dragon in particular. In fact, it's not a very well known dragon, but it is the oldest that we know of according to ancient writings. And that is Anzu, aka Zu, aka Mdugud, or Zu, the divine storm bird, who has been known to humanity for at least 7,000 years, dating back all the way to the cradle of civilization itself in Sumer, which is known to others by Sumeria. Um, the reason why I find this one really important is I find a link of a specific dragon who's kind of hopped around the geography and people um, who it shepherds, but has one overall overarching character that follows through all of these stories and is really what brought me to this belief about dragons in the first place. And so even though it might have started in Sumer, eventually it made its way to Syria and Acadia, and then eventually made its way to the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, and other Semitic tribes, made its way over to the Mesoamerican areas, including names like Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, and eventually made its way up to Hyperborea or Tartaria, which is now located in Russia, and then even made it further west and northwest to the Scandinavian regions and the Germanic regions before making its way to the place where the Anglo-Saxons dwelt and created a home.
Fantastically interesting stuff. Can you also speak on the idea that some human bloodlines, emperors and kings, actually have some of the dragon blood in them, and that that's how they derive their right to rule human thrones and principalities?
Oh yeah, I'd love to do that. That's actually a very fascinating topic. So, well, a good example of that in today's time is the Japanese nobility, which, by the way, never went away or was truly punished after World War II, and still persists to this day. Even though they have a prime minister, they're still a monarchical civilization. But in the old legends, the reigning emperors and their bloodlines are said to have descended from an ancient dragon. And this is actually a very common reoccurring motif amongst many of these royal bloodlines, if you will, including the Chinese. Whenever they used to have an emperor for thousands of years, had a very similar belief. Um, in a different way, not exactly pertaining to real dragons or what you might consider dragons. Other areas like Greece saw themselves as the descendants of the gods and descendants of the titans and descendants of the primordial creators of the universe itself. Um, in other belief systems, you have like in a lot of medieval European history, you have certain bloodlines of nobility. They don't necessarily have to be the current kings and queens of their area, but of high nobility who believe in one shape or another that they came from the same kind of dragons spoken about in Beowulf or in many other epics that they read and the oral stories that they passed on to one another. We don't per se know exactly who all is a part of these bloodlines because a lot of it's been intentionally veiled to keep it hidden, to keep these bloodlines on the safer side, and also so that these bloodlines know who they are without everyone knowing who they are. I guess a perfect example of this is, well, I guess I'm going to go on this route. I didn't think I'd be talking about this one tonight, but a perfect example of this is there used to be this bloodline that made its way over to what is now part of Romania. It's just northeast of Budapest a little bit, not too far. It's kind of like in that area. There was this person known as Vlad the Impaler, and they were the descendant of another Vlad, not Vlad the Impaler, but another Vlad. And from a young age, Vlad the Impaler liked to put things on sticks because that's his father's famous way of executing people was to impale things. And so he would start off small with rodents and pests and farm animals. And eventually he made it to the point where whenever he became king of the state and the land that he dwelt in and was fighting tribal wars with his neighbors, he started impaling his enemies, and not just his enemies, but the people he resided over who didn't do as they were told or went against Vladimir's interests. And so essentially what happened is at some point, this Turkish, or no, this Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was resolved to take Vladimir the Impaler's land. And Vladimir the Impaler and his men got word of this, got wind of this. And so they would do these night raids while on cavalry on horses, which, by the way, requires a lot of skill, a lot of perception. And they would kill and capture a bunch of these people. And the ones that they captured alive, they would put up on a stick. And this wouldn't kill people immediately. They knew exactly where to impale someone so that it didn't hit any critical organs, and so that you would have these people who were impaled for 3 or 4 days until they died. And it wasn't because they bled out or they had some sort of critical damage to one of their major organs, but because of more benign things like thirst or, you know, exhaustion, lack of food, that sort of thing, quote unquote natural causes, if you will. And what ended up happening is eventually the Sultan of this Ottoman Empire got very close, within miles even, of Vladimir's estate. And Vlad was resigned to give him a sort of show, if you will. And so he had multiple people put on multiple stakes. We're talking about anywhere from hundreds to thousands of these Sultan's warriors, his kin, his people, who were just impaled on sticks, dying or dead.
Thank you for your answers. I'm not going to be able to speak anymore, so you can close up. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just end this story really quick. So essentially, what happened is the Sultan came to a site so scary and so nightmarish that it scared him away from ever stepping foot in what is now known as Transylvania, what is now known as a Transylvanian estate. And well, he saw hundreds of his people impaled, dying, and there was no way for him to save. So he said, let's go back home." And little did he know that he was just a couple miles away from capturing Vlad the Impaler himself. It was but sheer fear that scared him away. The reason why I bring this up is there's a number of bloodlines that stem from this bloodline. It's like a tree, like Yggdrasil, like the ultimate tree of trees. And there are many notable members of European nobility to this day who proudly claim this lineage, this dragon bloodline, if you will, who are in fact major players, not just in the geopolitical sense, but the cultural sense and the national sense of their respective nations. And so, I guess to finish answering your question without going too far into the details, because I'm not exactly allowed to, yes, there are bloodlines of the nobility and non-nobility who stem from the 72 founding dragons, and they still exist to this day. And I guess I'll end this podcast and by saying, whatever you do, don't take the mark of the beast.
Thank you so much, Stu. Amazing stuff. Thanks everybody for attending. Let's jump to the Templar Tavern if you guys want to keep chatting.